The Iraqi invasion 20 years later. Got an article here from 2023 from motherjones.com. I'll put the link in the description down below. I feel it's only right to talk about some of the things the Bushes did in the Middle East and around the world. I've focused on the Clintons, specifically in Haiti, in my last few videos. And the Republicans are no bueno as well. So let's get into it. I'll be focusing on them for a couple articles here to be fair and balanced, because many of our political figures have done really bad things around the world in the name of freedom and democracy that has really been enriching the military-industrial complex and some really bad players in the world. And I share these articles and this information with you because, one, it's wrong. And when you see a crime, you know, you're supposed to report that crime, and I'm reporting these crimes, and hopefully people will wake up and not trust these people, realize who they are. Maya Angelou said it. When they show you who they are, believe them. Let's get into this. The Iraq invasion 20 years later. It was indeed a big lie that launched the catastrophic war. Subtitle is Bush and Cheney were not misled by flawed intelligence. They were promoting false information. This is also relevant to what's happening in Gaza. Netanyahu was behind. He pushed very hard and he said, hey, there's no question that Saddam Hussein has these weapons, and it was all bullshit. So we have to take that into consideration too. I'll probably be doing a video reaction to that too down the road. I've got that queued up. Let's jump in and talk about this. Before there was Donald Trump's big lie, there was George W. Bush's big lie. Now, I'm not sure what the big lie they're referring to from Donald Trump, but remember, I used to support Trump. I do not do that anymore because he appears to be one of the establishment, just like they all are, just a better actor, right? Oh, I'm sorry, we're going to have to give these pharma companies billions of dollars, even though they haven't earned our trust and they have a long history of making fraudulent, misleading claims about their products. They have been fined the most money based on terms from the Department of Justice. You can look that up. It's all readily available. They were intricately involved in the Vioxx problem and the opioid problem. And you know all about those things that destroyed a lot of human beings' lives. Okay, let's jump in. 20 years ago this week, again, this was from 2023, Bush and his sidekick, Vice President Dick Cheney, launched a war against Iraq. They greased the way to this tragic conflagration. You don't hear that word a lot. Conflagration. I don't know if I'm even saying that right. With the false claims that Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein possessed an arsenal of weapons of mass destruction that directly threatened the United States, and that he was in league with Al-Qaeda, the perpetrators of the horrific September 11th attack. Their invasion, which led to the deaths of over 4,000 American soldiers, let's read that again, 4,000 Americans, sons and daughters, and hundreds of thousands of Iraqi civilians. I've heard about 500,000 of human beings just like you and I, if you're watching this in the Western world. And the violence and instability in the region that resulted in ISIS is now widely considered to have been a strategic blunder of immense proportion. Oops, our bad. We got that wrong. You make up your own mind about whether it was wrong or whether it was intentional, you know. 3 months before he died in 2018, Senator John McCain of Arizona, a leading advocate for the war and the post-invasion troop surge, published his final book, The Restless Wave, which included a self-damning verdict. The principal reason for invading Iraq, that Saddam Hussein had WMD, weapons of mass destruction, was wrong. The war, with its cost in lives and treasure and security, I'm not sure what the treasure was, lives and treasure and security, can't be judged as anything other than a mistake. A very serious one, and I have to accept my share of blame for it. Oops, our bad. I've enriched myself for my whole life making mistakes, and now I'm on my deathbed and I'm going to confess. Oops, my bad. Other one-time cheerleaders for the Iraq War have voiced regret and occasionally shame. In a 2018 book, Max Boot, an analyst who was once deeply ensconced in the world of neocon foreign policy, neoconservatives, that's kind of a new term in my vocabulary the last number of years. I'd never really heard it before. wrote, quote, "I can finally acknowledge the obvious. It was all a big mistake. Saddam Hussein was heinous, but Iraq was better off under his tyrannical rule than the chaos that followed. I regret advocating the invasion, and I feel guilty about all the lives lost. Oops, my bad. I guess I'm guilty of all the lives lost." This is why you got to be super careful, my friend, who you're listening to. Like, in 2024, why are people listening to Netanyahu? He was one of the bunch that says, you got to go in, hey, U.S., go in and do these things to these Iraqis. Remember, 500,000 is the number I saw of civilian people. Probably some civilian and military people in there, but mostly civilian people, from what I understand. Do some fact checking on me. Don't even take my word for it. Let's see where we're at here. If I got on my little tyrant, because it makes me angry when we get lied to and fellow human beings get, Let's see. 3 years earlier, New York Times columnist David Brooks, who had been a loud and naive beater of the war drums in 2003, opined. I love that word, opined. The decision to go to war was a clear misjudgment. Last week in The Atlantic, David Frum, the pro-war speechwriter for Bush, who coined the axis of evil. Remember the axis of evil? Spin doctors, marketing, advertisers. Phrase that justified targeting Iraq and North Korea and Iran, noted the decision to invade was plainly, in quotes, unwise, and that the war was a misadventure, in quotes. Let's give one or two hoorahs for those who can declare they got it wrong. I'll give them a hoorah. Little bit late to save the lives of the innocent people that were lost, and also to little too late to stop the enrichment of bad guys in the world. That's the other thing. It's a double whammy. Citizens just like us in the West, get their lives taken, and wealth and resources and, my understanding, gold and monies are taken and put in the hands of bad guys. That's why I tell people, watch your back in 2024. Watch your back. You probably already know this. Yes, the conclusion is now obvious, given that no significant WMDs were found in Iraq after American bombs and troops were unleashed on the country, and that the invasion, contrary to the assurances of the Bush-Cheney administration and its cocksure neoconservative allies, did not trigger a flowing of democracy in the Middle East. Now let's talk about Libya too. That article's coming. As I educate myself and share this with you if you are so inclined, my understanding is what we did to Libya and assisting in the taking out and the facilitating of the removal of Gaddafi, is that it threw that region into a shit show too. That was under Hillary Clinton and the State Department. These people are either really stupid, in which case you want to stay way away from them, and in a perfect world they would be ostracized from society. They're either really stupid or they're either really corrupt. Either way, it's a bad idea to have these people up at a pulpit saying, hey, we got to do all this stuff. They're liars and cheaters and thieves and stealers. Yet it's one thing to acknowledge a misstep in policy judgment. It's quite another to admit to abetting a fraud. Wow, this article is baller on Mother Jones. Many of the Iraq war regretters insist that they pursued the war in good faith, predicated on solid assumptions, and propelled by genuine concern for U.S. security. Again, incompetent or corruption. If someone leads you into a war and is like, our bad 20 years later, you really need to put that person, I don't know. You make up your own mind. I think they should be in jail. My personal belief. And I think all their wealth and assets should be stripped and given back to humanity, to the people they did wrong. What they don't confess to is being part of an effort to purposefully bamboozle the American public and whip up support for the war with scare 'em tactics and disinformation. Frum, who has become a pal of mine during the Trump era, provides a good example. In his essay, he challenges the Bush lied and people died view. Remember that statement, Bush lied, people died view. Noting, I don't believe any leaders of the time intended to be dishonest. Again, it doesn't matter. If you're a fool, if you're incompetent, you need to leave your position. I don't understand why that is so hard. to understand. People, vast destruction to the area. They were shocked and dazed by 9/11. Okay, whatever. Then you're not a good leader. Then you're not fit for leadership. If you're shocked and dazed by it, if you can't investigate properly, again, I think it's corruption and worse. They deluded themselves. This self-delusion argument, we believed this self-delusion argument, we believed what we said, is often packaged with the contention that the Bush-Cheney crowd rendered their decisions on the basis of flawed intelligence that stated Iraq had WMDs and thus these leaders did not intentionally misrepresent the threat. Then you clean house 100%. If you get flawed intelligence, you clean the intelligence. Like, go as deep as you can to fix the problem. But what the U.S. does, and I'm pro-U.S. I live in the U.S. I love this country, but I don't love some of the a-holes that are running this country and have been running it. They're either incompetent or super corrupt. There's no other example. There's no other explanation. You clean the house, you know. But this is a phony narrative. The intelligence assessments that suggested Iraq possessed significant amounts of WMDs and was close to developing a nuclear weapon produced under tremendous pressure from the Bush White House were often disputed by experts within the intelligence community. So there were good guys and gals probably speaking out about it, thank God. And later, but before the invasion, these findings were challenged by UN WMD inspectors who were scrutinizing Iraq. Yet Bush Cheney and their top aides, Donald Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz, Scooter Libby, and others embraced these problematic evaluations as well as assorted and unproven or disproven reports in order to justify the case for war. And here's the key point. Oversold these findings to the public. No shit. No shit. This is why I really encourage people to be really aware of what's happening now with what Netanyahu is saying, with what's going on in Israel and Gaza, with maybe reading Albert Pike's letter to Mazzini written in 1871. Watching the documentaries, Tantura, about Israel's conquest of the Palestinian land, even right around 1948-47. Watching the occupation of the American mind. That one's on YouTube, I believe, or Rumble. That's about the propaganda campaign that Netanyahu engages in. Watching the Other Israel in 1987, the Ted Pike documentary. I mean, there's some major shit going on that affects everyone in the world. I don't have to tell you this, but it is a wild time in the world. And these bad actors that have been hosing us over for decades, they need to be checked, my friend. Meanwhile, they issued overwrought statements about the supposed threat from Iraq that either were unsupported by the faulty intelligence or utterly baseless. In short, Bush and Cheney did lie. And those that marched with them toward war were part of a campaign deliberately fueled with falsehoods. At one point, Bush even discussed with British Prime Minister Tony Blair concocting a phony provocation that could be used to start a war. In our 2006 book, Hubris, The Inside Story of Spin, Scandal, and the Selling of the Iraq War, Michael Isikoff and I chronicled numerous instances when Bush and his lieutenants mischaracterized the WMD threat and purported but largely non-existent tie between Saddam and Al-Qaeda. Let's start with Cheney. In August 2002, as the Bush administration kicked off its campaign to win public support for an invasion of Iraq, the vice president, speaking to a convention of the veterans of foreign wars, declared, quote, simply stated, there is no doubt that Saddam Hussein now has weapons of mass destruction. There is no doubt he is amassing them to use against our friends, against our allies, and against us, end quote. Again, in hindsight, a complete and total lie, and they've admitted to it. But at that point, there was no confirmed intelligence establishing that Saddam had revived a major WMD operation, nor that he intended to strike the United States with such arms. This is why I don't ever listen to anything they ever say. This is why in 2020, when they said, hey, there's a VIR US on the loose, I was like, you guys are known liars and thieves and criminals of the highest order. Falsus unus, falsus optimus. You are in the category of a non-trustable person, and I do not trust whatever you say, and I'll take my chances with whatever, because if I'm going to make a bet, I look at the data and go, oh, you guys have lied to us multiple times. You screw us over financially. You screw over education, kids in the education. Everything is a lie in this freaking Western world. It sucks. In fact, the most recent intelligence assessments at the time had concluded Iraq was not the dire danger that Cheney had claimed. The previous year, Secretary of State Colin Powell had testified to Congress that Iraq remained, quote, contained. So that's just the previous year, the 1 year before they started their freaking campaign. See, this is why Americans have short attention spans. Like, please remember history. What's the saying? If you don't know history, you are bound to repeat it. And also, you either trust your government or you know history. That's my favorite quote of the day. Congress had remained contained, or he told the Congress Iraq remained contained, that its military was, quote, weak, and that the best intelligence estimates suggest that they have not been terribly successful. Remember when they told American people, oh yeah, it's going to be tough getting through the 1 million man army of Saddam Hussein, and they didn't even fight back? Lies, an empire of lies. The best intelligence estimates suggest that they have not been terribly successful in developing chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons. In late March 2002, Vice Admiral Thomas Wilson, the chief of the Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, I've never really heard of that term, that agency. So many government agencies. In little notice testimony to the Senate Armed Services Committee, stated that the Iraqi military was, quote, significantly degraded, end quote, and that Saddam possessed only, quote, residual amounts of WMD, not a growing arsenal. He made no reference to a nuclear program or any ties between Saddam and al-Qaeda. While Cheney was building up support for the invasion at the VFW convention, General Anthony Zinni, who had been commander-in-chief of the U.S. Central Command, was on the stage. He was surprised by Cheney's stark and harsh remarks about Iraq. Years later, he recounted his reaction in a documentary, quote, "It was a total shock. I couldn't believe the vice president was saying this, you know. In doing work with the CIA on Iraq WMD, through all the briefings I heard at Langley, I never saw one piece of credible evidence that there was an ongoing program," end quote. Put simply, Cheney was lying. Cheney was lying. Of course, there's more. Cheney repeatedly cited a report that 9/Uno. I don't want to get the little freaking go check this out from YouTube down below. Hopefully we've avoided that. Conspirator Mohammed Atta had secretly met in Prague with an Iraqi intelligence officer. This was supposedly evidence of a nefarious plot linking Saddam and al-Qaeda. Yet the CIA and the FBI had investigated and found no evidence that such an encounter had occurred. This conclusion was conveyed to Cheney, but he continued to publicly refer to the unconfirmed Prague meeting. Cheney was purposefully disseminating disinformation to bolster the impression that Saddam was in cahoots with the evildoers of 9/Uno. This is a damning example of Cheney knowingly citing discredited intelligence to score points. The 9/11, there we said it, we'll probably get the ticker, Commission later affirmed that the report of a Prague meeting was bunk. Bush, too, pushed the Saddam al-Qaeda link. In November 2002, he stated that Saddam, quote, is a threat because he's dealing with al-Qaeda. See, if they can't get you one way, they'll get you another. And this is why I look at, all it takes is for a few bad actors to hose over an entire society or culture. I hope you see that. Weeks later, Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld had asserted he possessed bulletproof evidence that Saddam was connected to Osama bin Laden. In March 2003, Cheney insisted that Saddam had a long-standing relationship with al-Qaeda. That's in quotes, long-standing relationship. The intelligence did not show any of this. No bulletproof evidence was ever revealed. Bush, Cheney, and Rumsfeld were making it all up, as the 9/11 Commission later noted. There had been no intelligence confirming significant contacts between Iraq and al-Qaeda. Here was another instance in which Bush and Cheney were not misled by flawed intelligence. They were promoting false information. This is why I say the biggest, is it purveyor or disseminator? Purveyor of false information is the GOV. Not all of it, but certain a-holes in the GOV. They also deliberately overinflated the most dangerous piece of the supposed threat posed by Saddam, Iraq's nuclear program. In September 2002, Cheney said there was, quote, very clear evidence, end quote, that Saddam was developing nuclear weapons, and pointed to Iraq's acquisition of aluminum tubes that were to be used to enrich uranium for bombs. Condoleezza Rice, Bush's national security advisor, echoed this claim. It takes a village to F up this bad. All these people need to be questioned and or, put on trial, in my opinion, stating that these aluminum tubes purchased by Iraq were only really suited for nuclear weapons programs. But Cheney and Rice neglected to disclose that there was a heated dispute within the intelligence community about this supposed evidence. The top scientific experts in the U.S. had concluded that these tubes were unsuitable for a nuclear weapons program. Only one CIA analyst, who was not a scientific expert, contended the tubes were smoking gun proof. Only one. You can't buy them all off. You just buy off a few and you get what you need. It's on us, by the way. It's on the American people to wake up and to call bullshit on these guys. These guys aren't going to change. Bad characters are going to be in the world. It's on us to go, hey, shut the F up. Stop killing people around the world in the name of, whatever, which is really enriching themselves. That it's wild what's happening. That was all the Bush-Cheney White House needed. It embraced the weaker case and ignored the more informed analysis. Cheney and Rice were cherry-picking, choosing bad intelligence over good, and not sharing with the public the better information that undermined the ultimate objective. That's what they always do. That was just one of the falsehoods and exaggerations about WMDs that Bush and his crew deployed to rig the national debate in favor of war. In October 2002, Bush said that Hussein had a, quote, massive stockpile, end quote, of biological weapons. But as CIA Director George Tenet noted in early 2004, the CIA had informed policymakers that Iraq may have possessed some lethal biological agents, but the agency had no specific information on the types or quantities of weapons, agent, or stockpiles at Baghdad's disposal. The massive stockpile was a fabrication. And here's another whopper. In December 2002, Bush declared, "We do not know whether or not Iraq has a nuclear weapon." That's a quote. That was not what the National Intelligence estimate produced that fall had stated, as Tenet would later testify. We said that, this is a quote, "We said that Saddam did not have a nuclear weapon and probably would have been unable to make one until 2007 to 2009. Bush made it seem that U.S. intelligence believed it was possible that Saddam already possessed a nuclear weapon. When the intelligence was clear that Iraq, whatever nuclear program it might have maintained, had not reached that point." Let me see how much longer we have so I don't keep you going. It's a little, we're close. We're very close. Let's keep going here. All right. There are many other instances of Bush, Cheney, and their aides misrepresenting the facts to grease the way to war. Secretary of State Colin Powell's presentation to the UN in February of 2003 that laid out the Bush administration's rationale for war was full of false and misleading information. In 2016, he called it, quote, "a great intelligence failure. Oops, our bad, my bad." Yet Bush defenders and other commentators have insisted there was no deliberate effort to con the public. Of course they're going to insist that. They're con people themselves. They point out that Bush and his national security team felt the threat was real and believed that Saddam had stockpiled WMDs and was in league with Al-Qaeda. Again, incompetence or corruption. I don't care how you got it wrong. If you're wrong, you need to leave and you need to basically stand trial for being incompetent. Like, ignorance is not a defense in the court of law. Why is it a defense? On key fronts, they were convinced that they knew better than the available intelligence. In his new book on the Iraq War, Confronting Saddam Hussein, George W. Bush and the Invasion of Iraq, noted historian Melvin Leffler dismisses the question of Bush's pre-war, this is a new one for me, prevarication And here's an excerpt from the book. When critics blame Bush personally or his advisors more broadly, they tend to obfuscate the larger dilemmas of statecraft that inhered after 9/11. Bush failed not because he was a weak leader, a naive ideologue, or a lying manipulative politician. Tragedy occurs not because leaders are ill-intentioned, stupid, or corrupt. Tragedy occurs when earnest people and responsible officials seek to do the right thing and end up making things much worse. Bullshit. Again, I don't give an F why it happened. This is what always happens in America. We our bad, and then we still get screwed. Stop it. It's stupid. I don't care why it happened. If you're a leader and you make a mistake like that, you should be tried for it. I'm sorry. Why is ignorance again okay in the court of law, but not in the court of the world? For Loeffler, who based much of his book on interviews with Bush-Cheney officials, the war was a disaster, but not a dishonest enterprise. It was a case of earnestness gone awry. I don't give a shit. It doesn't matter now. That lets Bush and Cheney off the hook. The war was a catastrophe, falsely pitched to the American people. Whether or not their intentions were honorable, Bush, Cheney, Rice, Rumsfeld, and their comrades adopted dishonorable means to gin up popular support for the invasion of Iraq. 2 decades later, it remains much easier for many to acknowledge the war was a miscalculation than a lie. Yet it was both. It was promoted by Bush and his minions with a reckless disregard for the truth and with hype that was fueled by falsehoods and designed to generate fear instead of serious, reasoned public discussion. Let's talk about fear. Remember, in my opinion, fear and rushing are their two most favorite weapons. And son of a gun, people fall for that shit. Fear is the mind killer. Frank Herbert, Dune. Fear. This is why the Bible said, do not fear. Do not fear. Over and over and over and over again. It's my understanding that it is the most prominent message in the Bible. Do not fear. Do not fear. Do not fear. Americans need to get that through their head and stop with the rushing. They rush, and fear is their favorite tactics. So scary. Let's see where I was at before I went off on my little tirade there. Bush and Cheney sold it, and they got it wrong. Without all the misrepresentations, unfounded assertions, and exaggerations, would this calamitous war have occurred? Perhaps. We will never know. But it should not be forgotten that this debacle of death and destruction was not only a profound error of policymaking, it was the result of a carefully executed crusade of disinformation and lies. This is why I don't believe those mofos for anything in any way, shape, or form. I think that no, it's not the end of yes, it is the end of the article. We made it. We made it. Thank you for hanging with me. That's a baller article. That's motherjones.com. And motherjones.com and this guy who wrote it, let's find out who he is. David Korn. Again, from March 20th, 2023. You have my respect, sir, because that is a baller article. That's only a year ago. So don't say all news organizations have been corrupted, because Mother Jones certainly hasn't. They basically lambasted the Bush people. All right, I appreciate that. Leave me a thumbs up. I appreciate you watching. Leave me a thumbs up if you like this video. Stick around for more. Lots more to come. Lots of lies and deception to unearth in the world to help protect ourselves and our fellow human beings. We are all connected in the world, and what happens to someone over there on the other side of the world ultimately happens to us. Thank you very much. Have an awesome day. Leave me a thumbs up if you like this video. Follow me on all social media at GMarkPhillips. And until next time, I wish you all the best health, wealth, and success. Bye-bye.